Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Power of Perspective podcast with myself, Hannah. I'm your host for today. So today we are grateful to be joined in the studio by two of my colleagues who have served or either served or are still serving with the British Army. We're going to be talking about their time with the military, how this continues to influence their corporate careers today, and how we can all support ex-forces in our everyday lives. Before we kind of dive into that, let's introduce you to our guests. So we've got veteran Ian Norgate, who is now a test manager, and reservist Suli Scatchard, who's a business analyst. Both specialise in our national security and government business unit. So welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, good.
Very well, thank you.
Lovely. Okay, so could you introduce yourselves? Tell us a bit about your backgrounds. What drove your decision to join the military? Ian, do you want to start us off?
Yes, so I'm in the NSG client. I come from quite a long family of military people, right up to before World War I. We've got their pictures all on the wall back home next to their sort of campaign medals they've done. It's where my grandparents met. I think they were posted to Antwerp at the time, which made my clearance forms an absolute nightmare to complete because of just multiple postings during your last 10 years was a real pain. I'm not going to use the phrase indoctrination, but when all you're given for birthdays, Christmases are soldiers, war movies and other toys, it runs you pretty close down the line. It made the joining up relatively inevitable.
That's a lot of history. That's fascinating though. Suli, what about you?
So my background isn't necessarily as interesting or as colourful as Ian's. I'm quite the opposite. If anything, whilst my granddad did national service, my family aren't necessarily super military. So I wouldn't want to say I joined on a whim, but it was somewhat out of the blue. I joined at university, and it was an interesting phone call to my mum when I told her that I was going to give it a go. So if anything, actually, I kind of navigated it by myself because I don't really have much family history in the area, but still in, so clearly enjoy it.
And you joined as a reservist rather than...
Yes, so the difference between Ian and I would be that I didn't join as a regular, so I joined as a reservist. I originally, at university, was actually at the careers fair. They run the officer training course, so I joined that at university, kind of did that alongside my studies and decided to just continue that on. And then when I moved to London, moved to a reserve unit there. So, I mean, the reserves used to be called the Territorial Army or the TA. So yeah, I do it part-time.
And how is reservist different to what you did in?
So mine is your day-to-day job and where you live. You're 24/7. I think from the reservist side of it, there is a requirement to do a number of exercises or training bits every year. You can be called up for deployment on other events. I know on two of my Afghan tours, we had reservists deploy with us just to bump the manpower up. What's great is they can sometimes bring a lot of skills that you don't get in your unit, which is super helpful because trying to maximize on everyone's qualifications for that would be an absolute nightmare.
What kind of skills?
So we had two lighting technicians with their regular day-to-day job, sort of think concerts at social things, deploying as ground crew. So they could do all the ground crew jobs, but they just had skills that we didn't necessarily have, which meant when we were trying to rebuild a hangar out in Afghan, we actually had somebody who knew large-scale electronics and could wire the thing up to be a lot more safer than the way we'd done it.
That's really interesting. Okay, so what kind of thing do you do with your time with the reservists?
So the cat badge that I sit with is the Royal Signals. So we are the Army's communication specialists, and that ranges from radios predominantly. So we do very high frequency, ultra high frequency radio communications, but we also do a lot of cyber. So to Ian's point earlier about kind of what reservists bring to the regular army, one thing that we attract a lot, because my particular regiment's based in London, is a lot of IT specialists and cyber. And cyber is one of the things that the Royal Signals also, comes within their domain. So we also, again, we can pull lots of civilian knowledge into, the regulars and feed that in. And they found that really, really useful. We've even have competitions as well within the army, because, it's all kinds of fun goes on in the army. And one basically is like a cyber competition. And because we've got quite a lot of people who do cyber and IT in their day-to-day lives as well, we often do and perform really, really well in those. So, yeah, but at the same time, you also have, we've got people who are drivers as well, chefs and cooks and medics. And of course, they can bring some civilian knowledge and expertise into the army. So there's quite a good kind of knowledge exchange as well, which, I think the army really appreciates about reserves.
That's really interesting. I've never personally known that much about it, so that's really great. And you were in the Royal Signals too?
No, so I was in the Army Air Corps. They are the Army helicopters are small to light battlefield helicopters. So think Lynx, Wildcat, or Apaches, which is where I spent most of my career. So light battlefielding, and within that you'll have ground crew functionality, rearm, refuel it, move the thing around, and then a signals capacity.
Right. Okay. So it is the 80th anniversary of BE Day this year. Big anniversary, big milestone. I just wanted to ask how you reflect on your time with the military around dates like this. Suli, do you want to?
Sure. I think particularly actually with certain reserve units, there is a long history that we definitely try to kind of maintain and we keep. For example, last year we went to Gallipoli as a battlefield study, and we do a lot of ceremonial stuff as well based within London. And I think times like that, when you'll read anecdotes, but also that interaction with the public as well, and people will come and they'll tell you stories about how much the military and seeing some of our activities means a lot to them because they've got family members who gave a lot of time and love and effort into the military. And I think times like that, often, particularly when you have, the army isn't necessarily my entire life. And so it can be quite, I'm context switching a lot. And I think particularly when it comes to events like this, milestones, where there are events that allow me to kind of, whilst partaking, reflect and really understand, how kind of rich British military history is. It gives me that kind of time and space to really appreciate, how many different people of all kinds, I look at kind of how eclectic our group is and imagine that, times a million, considering the number of people who have passed through the army. So I'd say, yeah, definitely kind of moments like this where we're able to reflect are really important to me. And that's how I spend that time, particularly, I'd say, because I don't, I'm not army 24/7. So as a reservist, that's what I do.
Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for that. Ian?
So I was very privileged as a incredibly fresh-faced air trooper to visit the Pegasus Bridge base in Normandy for the 61st D-Day Remembrance. So a while now for younger listeners. And at that time, there was still quite a number of veterans left from the precursor to the Army Air Corps, which is the glider pilot regiment. You got to meet them all. They're slightly doddering, but still able to drink an inordinate amount, you'd think, for their age. And you stand there, and you chat away, and the age will drop away from them, right? And you'll find out you've both gone out into the same bar and probably woken up in the same area of town. You've both gone on exercises and not really known where you were or what you were doing a lot of the time. And then they'll tell you about the events of D-Day as they've seen it, mostly with this kind of, oh yeah, it wasn't a big thing, right? But when you look at it, it's like, guys, this was an incredible thing. You flew from the UK to this football pitch of space in France with a map and a compass. I have to use the sat-nav on to get to Frimley. And getting to meet these incredible people, right, was such a moment of pride and bewilderment, because you'll look at the story and you'll see them as the superheroes, just a regular bunch of people in their 20s who did something superhuman. And last year I got to go back to help with the Standing with Giants Memorial that BAE helped sort of send some volunteers on to set up Memorial. And while I was setting that up, they put some plaques out that people are able to put through for veterans or for people that were lost. And one of them was the guy I'd met, Staff Sergeant Jeff Barkway, who'd flown one of the first gliders in. And I got to bring my wife along because she was the thing. I was like, this is Jeff. I met Jeff. Jeff was in a wheelchair, just had lost his arm on this event. I got to explain the stories he told me, and it was a real moment of kind of pride, but also sadness that generation is gone and can't tell those stories themselves now. And I know if you'll speak to any veterans, or if you hear them talk to each other and you can decode the language, they'll generally give you all the happy stories, the times when someone has messed up and put diesel in a Kerry heater and burned a CP down, or accidentally pushed a mass stake through their own toes. All right? And they are mostly enough to give a sheep person a heart attack, but great to hear. But I'll know from my generation at least, there's probably not one of them who hasn't seen the repatriation flight dip its wing over Afghan or Iraq, or has started to hear stories that someone who has gone has lost the battle with their own demons. And it can really hit hard, especially at pertinent times of the year. So while it can always seem that every time is great fun, there is still an underlying bit of pain that I don't think we're necessarily set up yet to deal with very well.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. That was really personal. Just clarify for anybody listening, she is health and safety.
Yes.
But I really didn't want to interrupt because that was such a powerful story. Yeah, thank you both so much for that. So you kind of mentioned it briefly, but moving from the military to corporate, what made you decide to take that step and how did you go about it?
So I just finished my third Afghan deployment, and the way the system worked out is it was a kind of a 6-month on, 18-month off. So you can almost see the next event on the horizon. And I would admit I didn't necessarily want to go back and do another one. I wanted to spend more time with my partner and not just to have that on weekend side of things and experience something a little bit different. Because my unit was quite wrapped up in what it did. It wasn't gonna change. So I made the answer. I want to do something different, spend more time at home. Now you do get like a year's sign out kind of time when you leave. There is like a transition partnership that goes through which BAE is kind of hooked into, and you get your plan together. You have time to runway yourself out. So it is very much on you as a person to do. While at an event, I bumped into someone from one of our sort of companies we work with, who convinced me after talking to me. He's like, what do you? I mostly look after and break people's IT, because that was kind of the role I was in at the time. I was like, have you ever tried testing? Which I think was just the official term for what I've been up to, and rolled in nicely, and I suppose quite luckily, into a full-time position there, which I know a lot of other people don't get quite the same privilege.
And how did you find that transition moving from one to the other?
So the army does teach you to deal with sort of monotony, confusion, and long periods away from home, which was very helpful because that company sent me to Telford for 18 months on a project to live in a hotel. And so a lot of my training came in very handy because it was living away from home, being by yourself. You've got to self-motivate yourself and understand the environment you've now rolled into. Some bits were very similar. Others, you have a daily stand-up in the military as well. So a lot of this stuff won't be different. What is different is there's not necessarily the support structure immediately available, or at least immediately obvious. There are always those kind of levers around the business which you can use to get things done and get things achieved, but they're just called something different in the military. You might go, oh, the stores, or the queue man, or got to go and find the clerk to figure out how my leave works. Different people, right? And it's kind of figuring out what that language is to get there is generally all they need to do.
Language side of it is not one I considered, but that's really interesting. That makes a lot of sense. And then, Suli, how do you, as you're doing both at the same time kind of thing, how do you think the two different careers compare?
That's an interesting one. I think definitely, to Ian's point, you can see some crossover, particularly when it comes to sometimes just boiling stuff down to its like at its simplest, at its most core. What is kind of in terms of prioritizing, what essentially do we need to get done, what needs to be done, and you can kind of cut away a lot of the fluffiness that I think sometimes, myself, I include myself in this bucket that we like to add to certain tasks and actions. So I definitely kind of think that the communication simplicity is something that I've taken from some of my kind of like military experience into work. But yeah, slightly different demographics, I suppose. But I like that. I think, having like a different group of people that I spend a lot of time with, and definitely, when you're on exercise, you see people at their lowest. They've seen me at my lowest and at my grumpiest. So it's kind of just like a different environment that you see people. And it's nice for me, I actually find, even though ironically, having both the reserves and work is time consuming, it's a weird balance, because then, it means that I can go back to work and having spent that time with that different group of people. And it just kind of gives me that variety that I really enjoy. But the food that works better. Food in the field stuff.
Fair. I can see that one. And then you've been out for quite a while now. If you kind of reflect on that time, is there any unexpected similarities that you've seen between the two?
There's still situations where absolutely very out. People are like, this is the task we need to go and do. And you go, groovy, fine. You just run off and do it and come back. And people sometimes look at you surprised. It's the task you wanted us to do. So it was done really quickly. Was I supposed to take more time with it? Right. And I think it's really people are brilliant at this part, which is give them a task and they'll often do it. They had the whole empowerment stuff down for some time. You will feel a lot like you're treated like a child. Bed checks are a thing when you've got a driving detail going on, and be at the armory 9 hours before you need to. Standard. But go take this Land Rover and set up a rebroadcast center over the other side of that hill. Good luck. And it can just get done. Right. And so I found the sort of willingness to empower juniors in my group. Right. Here is the task. Go. and, have them come back. Or if they come back and ask like quite a benign thing, it's like, is this something you need to ask? No. Why am I looking at you? And off they go. And, I find that is there's an easier way of providing leadership than sometimes the quite overarching look that people think the military has, but often I've not found it to be the case, or at least in the Air Corps, not necessarily as much of a thing.
So people are the same everywhere, both environments.
Yes, but I think you will see some more extremes of people in the military for stuff like exercises, especially ones that are built to get that out of you, because they want to see how you cope when you're under stress and strain and it's raining, someone's taking all your food away for reasons best known to themselves.
Yeah, we don't do that in corporate, don't. Yeah, let's not take people's food away. So sorry, I just have to ask, bed check?
But yeah, so enforced rest is a mandatory thing if people are going to be driving and or flying, right? Because accidents can happen if you haven't slept properly. And so, yeah, a bed check is a real thing you do with other adults to make sure they're in and sleeping.
Literally checking if someone's... Okay, cool. I thought maybe it was a neatness thing, but no, it's actually checking somebody's asleep.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily help. You come in, turn the light on, right, you're all asleep, good, turn the light off. It's like, well, I was.
Not necessarily helps, but that's good to know. That's good to know. So how do you think your experience in the military has shaped your life on this side of the fence, particularly somewhere like BAE?
BAE is a great one because it being a military one, that's a load of the language comes over with it. And thankfully, quite a good portion of veterans has come over with it. So you still get to keep a good chunk of that community, which it's very important to us. From a work point of view, and I learned this while a very junior person out in Afghan, is there are times when you can show not necessarily panic, but that you're taking things very seriously and you understand this part. But there's also an awful lot of occasions where you don't need to flap and it's fine, right? It's seriously, people, this isn't that bad. Let's just take our time, step back, and let's go and do it. It's okay. And not necessarily some of the projects I've been on, but sometimes some of the other stuff that comes in where they're like, we have to get this done by tomorrow. It's like, you really don't. Just can't. And I think that's doubly important when you're in a position of leadership, to show that in front of any juniors you have on the project, that flapping doesn't help.
Yeah. There's a time and a place for that kind of level of, okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. Suli, do you have anything to add around kind of how it's shaped your life on this side of the fence?
I guess one thing that pleasantly surprised me, Ian mentioned that kind of reminded me, would be just, especially within a place like BAE, but even I've had like clients as well, you kind of can pick up sometimes. You can kind of get an inkling that somebody's ex-forces, or they drop in something, or they talk about, scoff houses or something that gives them away, and food. Scoff house, food. And it's really easy to make a connection with somebody once, because you obviously know the right questions to ask. And obviously I find it genuinely quite interesting. I've had people both that I've worked with or clients, and when you get that, it's just that rapport is just instantly built, because you can understand some of their stories, you can place them, you can kind of get a lot more out of them than you would have through kind of that kind of small talk stage of building up a relationship. And I've managed to kind of make some really strong connections actually very quickly within a business environment, just because you can kind of, if you do connect with somebody who is ex-forces or even a reservist, it just makes it so much easier, and it's really nice actually. And obviously, BAE does have a lot of ex-forces people and a lot of veterans, which it's just really nice to kind of be able to build connections that easily when you find people like that.
Yeah, so you've both really kind of talked about the power of stories and connection and people, which is really lovely as a kind of thread that runs through it all. So on the subject of stories, do you have any kind of tales maybe about how being military previously is maybe hindered in the corporate world? Maybe there's some times where it wasn't quite so helpful.
The humour, same as like in the police, where it can be quite dark, albeit an unhelpful coping mechanism we have. But when you're sharing a shared tale, it may have happened in Kandahar or Bastion or somewhere out in Iraq, and it may be funny to you. It may not be for the people in the room, and sometimes it's a case of, right, I need to understand the whole audience, not just the direct person I'm talking to.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because humour is such a part of it. It seems.
Yes.
Tell me a bit more about that. It's interesting to me that something so humour is such a vital part of something that a lot of people see as so serious.
Yeah, again, it's one of those kind of like emotional sort of reactions to something. If it's either going to be tears or laughter, and I think the military tends to lean towards the one on the right hand side, even at the expense of, well, that was he fell off the back of a Land Rover and really hurt himself. But yeah, but it's funny. It's that kind of line, which childish and probably not very helpful, but it's one of those stories that gets shared more.
Yeah. I think it's useful for people to understand, if I work with a lot of serving and ex-forces, and that is one of the things that I think you have to understand to really make the relationships work, like we've been talking about. No, that's really useful. So, do you have any advice for others considering the move, or maybe early in their kind of career change into corporate, or even a reservist like yourself, Suli?
I could start on kind of being a reservist. I'll definitely say it is a time commitment. And I mean, I'm guilty of saying yes to absolutely everything, so it suits me perfectly. But at the same time, it is one of those, it sounds so cheesy, but, you get as much out of it as you put in. Obviously, there is a kind of a threshold in terms of days you have to give. So currently I attend kind of every Tuesday. I go to like a drill night, and that's my evening gone. And then you get, various other things thrown at you, courses as well. So I do like a 2-week camp as well every year. And that's part of, annually, that's what I have to do. So I have to take that off. And I'm quite fortunate because BAE do offer kind of reservist leave. However, some of my other mates who are in the reserves, they don't get that. They have to take that off as annual leave. So there is kind of that element as well. Obviously, if you are working within quite a big firm who is very pro supporting, forces and the reserves, and they are part of the Armed Services Covenant, then you feel a lot more supported. I'll definitely encourage you to go for it. Obviously, if you are in a line of work where it is a bit more difficult to get time off, then that is just a consideration. But at the same time, I mean, I've been able to do so much strange stuff and so many side quests that I definitely would not have had the opportunity to if I'd not joined. So, I mean, I'd never learned how to ski, and then I did like a 0 to hero course. Didn't get to the hero part, but I learned how to ski with the army. And again, like financially, I would have never been able to, afford to do that growing up. So that was a really cool experience. Ended up riding a horse for the first time. That was really random. Got involved in the Lord Mayor show, which was really cool. Particularly as my mum, as I said, before, isn't from a military background. So for her to like see me doing ceremonial stuff, kind of just put into context, kind of the amount of time and effort I put into the army, and that this is something I'm really passionate about, and she kind of has to accept that. But yeah, so I'd definitely say, there's so much you can get out of it, like sports-wise, adventure training, when you do get the opportunity to. Obviously depends on how well organised your unit is, but I've really enjoyed that. And especially when I first signed up, I kind of looked at myself and thought, well, I'm not exactly, I don't scream British Army really, what am I doing? But I've definitely learned a lot more about myself, from more kind of like, not even just physical, but mentally, in terms of just endurance and being able to grizz it out really, and just, get through stuff and put myself through a lot more than I thought I would, and have that kind of like mental flexibility to just laugh it off basically and just say, well, it's a bit rubbish, but I'm going to crack on. So if you are looking for that kind of element in your life, then I'd definitely go for it. But of course, you do have to accept that it is a time commitment, and there are times where you do have to travel, you do have to give other stuff up. But at the same time, I've made loads of really cool connections, and it's something that I particularly enjoy, communications. But I do think sometimes you do have a bit of research, I'd say, to make sure that, you are joining a group that you really enjoy and doing something that you are interested in. Because sometimes, you will be doing, if you get messed around, you do have to do stuff that you don't particularly enjoy, that isn't necessarily super fun. And as long as you can kind of put up with that in order to get the best out of it, then yeah, I'll definitely recommend going for it, particularly if you're supported by, your company like I am.
Sounds like it's been such a huge positive for you.
There have been lows, don't get me wrong, there have been lows. I'm kind of like rose-tinted spectacles all the time, but yeah, overall, I've definitely enjoyed it.
And Ian, do you have any advice for people considering the move or new to corporate?
Yeah, I'd say if you're considering the move, you wouldn't roll out on exercise with a plan on the back of a old term fag packet. You shouldn't, right? So put a plan and a backup plan in place. You've got the time do the legwork to make sure you can land on a chunk of runway. Getting your network sorted out. Don't just rely on, I know a guy and I think he knows a guy. Put the effort in. And I think from the second point, and this is maybe the most important one, is there are lots of places out there you can reach out for help and assistance, right? And lots of companies run them. There are unlimited charities that can support you. So asking for help is still seen as not a great thing in the military. Bewilderingly, as we are set as one of the best teams, but we just don't like to say I need help. But please do just ask for help. And if you join your company, it's likely there's a lot of places there that can help and support you as well. Whether that could be your HR paths, or in our case, we have an ERG event net, which just reach out to any of us. We're more than happy to help wherever possible.
Thank you. And along those lines of kind of support and ongoing support, I'd like to ask about what the rest of the population, what we can do to support, veterans, reservists in kind of just everyday life and working environment. Like what should we be conscious of?
So I'd probably say never be afraid to ask them to talk about it, especially if you have an interest. But obviously ask, because some people may not have the level of rose-tinted goggles other people do on stuff. Standard. And maybe ask if that is the case, how best they can help them. It might be they like to be seated sort of near the window or at the corner, or if they have a meeting, can they be in a certain position? But I suppose like with any person in ERG, just ask. They're probably more than willing to tell.
ERG?
Oh, sorry. Employee Resource Group. It's the sets that we have to deal with people in a section.
Suli, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. So I'd say if you working with reservists, one thing that I've told some of my team is that often I'm on weekend exercises, which means that I have to kind of skedaddle on a Friday quite early, and I come back on a Sunday sometimes quite late. So often that means Monday I can be a bit groggy, and I'm normally quite a groggy person anyways, but I kind of I give them a heads up that my week can probably sometimes it can be just like a maintenance style event where it's not necessarily as physically demanding, but sometimes it can be a bit more physically demanding, and therefore I'm still a bit achy and still a bit tired, but they've been really supportive on that, and once I get going I'll be absolutely fine. And also just in terms of again that time commitment as well, sometimes I'll have times where I'm doing a course or something, and as long as I give them kind of ample notice, they've been quite good at kind of considering that. But if you haven't already gathered from Ian and I, people with WIS can't and won't shut up about their experiences. They love talking about it sometimes. So I'd definitely say don't be afraid to ask, even if you feel as if you don't necessarily have much of prior knowledge about the military. Just start, and we'll take it from there. And basically kind of just ask about how weekends went. I really enjoyed that, so I'd say.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you both, Ian and Suli. Thank you so much for taking the time to share those stories. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much for joining us today. If you have any questions about this episode, any others or future episodes, then please do email us on poppodcast@baesystems.com.